I'm just curious by a show of hands in here. Raise your hand if you were option C from that video. Don't touch my steering wheel. Yes, loud and proud. What I found in first service was interesting is that most people were pointing to the side. They were saying this person, and then that person wasn't raising their hand. And I think it's because, for me personally, I'm option C. I love driving, I love road trips, but I'm a little bit of a control freak, so that's kind of where it plays itself out. But I absolutely love road trips. I always have. And the music that I get to listen to, the books I listen to, the podcasts, or just, driving in silence and just enjoying the open road as the landscape changes, it's just so much fun for me. And I will admit, because I realized in preparing this week that I haven't taken a lot of road trips since having children. And so I don't know if that's going to change or not. Maybe I won't like them as much. Perhaps some of you are nodding, yes, that will change for you. But for me personally, when I think of road trips, I most often think of this route right here. It says Austin to Denver. Just by a show of hands, raise your hand if you've on this road before. Yeah, okay, a lot of us in here have done this trip. I love this because, one, I'm originally from Denver, but I grew up here in the Austin area, and I went there a lot as a kid, a lot of extended family there, and then as an adult, I've done this road trip maybe dozens of times now. I just love driving up there and driving back. It's like my favorite place to go, and my favorite stretch in this trip is really this little corner of New Mexico right here. And the reason I love it is because I just got done driving through Lubbock and Amarillo, and I'm feeling pretty depressed at this point. And I just want to say I apologize if you're from Lubbock or Amarillo, but I'm happy that you made it here. You made it out alive. This is good that you are here today. But I'm just always sad. It's just flat. It's like just nothing out there. And then all of a sudden it starts to change a little bit. You see some hills, and you see the Capitulan volcano and Mount Dora, and you're coming up on Raton, and then you see the Rocky Mountains off in the distance with the snow-capped peaks, and I just get so excited. I get so giddy every single time this happens. And then on the flip side, coming home, you come through Raton, you take a left, and then you drive off the highway, and you're going into this same stretch, and this deep sadness just starts to settle into me. And it's because I love the mountains. I love being in the mountains. And as we turn off, the ground gets flat, and you're starting to recognize you're about to be in Amarillo and Lubbock again, and you have to go through those places again. And it's just, once I get there, it's full-on depression until I get home, and I'm finally pulling myself out of it. But what I realize every time I'm on this road trip and we're driving home is that I always find myself looking up into the rearview mirror over and over and over again. And I see myself looking into something that looks something like this right here. And I just see those snow-capped peaks, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller, and I keep looking up, and there's this tear that just rolls down my face as I go. But I'm being dramatic, kind of. My wife would say that's actually true. But most often what happens is I maybe swerve a little bit too much, and I find myself having to keep glancing down. And the reason I start that way is because we're in this series called Rules for the Road. We're wrapping it up today. We've been talking all about the different roads that we are on in life, and I would say that speaking of a rear view mirror, that we all have a rear view mirror of our life. We can't really go back. Our roads don't really come equipped with reverse. We can't change anything in the past, but we can look back at what has happened. We can look back into our rearview mirror, and we can see a previous season, perhaps. Maybe it was pre-kids or pre-work or pre-responsibility. My wife, Ashley, and I, we were sitting in bed drinking coffee one Saturday morning, and our son was being watched by his grandparents, and we're sitting in bed drinking coffee, looking out at the window in silence. And it was amazing. And we just had this realization, what did we do with all of our time before we had children? I literally couldn't remember what we did with all of our time. And maybe if you look back in the rearview mirror, you have a moment like that, you recognize that. Maybe you think of the good old days, your 20s, the college years where it was just fun and free all the time. Maybe it's a relationship, a previous marriage, or a previous, the way a marriage used to feel, or a previous friendship or dating relationship or community of relationships. Maybe it's something with your family that you see. Maybe it's celebrations, graduations, or the birth of a child or a wedding, something like that. Maybe you see something that is difficult. You see a difficult season that you've been through. Perhaps you would go as far to say there was a word, trauma would be better to describe it. And I want to be careful in how we use this word, because I think in today's culture, sometimes trauma can be the catch-all word for anything hard. But for some of us in here, we look back into the rearview mirror of our life and we see real traumatic things that have happened. Or maybe it's just unknown. Like we look back there and it's just kind of foggy. We don't really know what we're seeing when we look in the rearview mirror of our life. I think there's two tendencies that we can have with our rearview mirror. One, I think that we can spend too much time looking in it. We do this whenever we're dwelling on the past and it keeps us from kind of living in the present. We're always thinking about that decision we made or what happened to us or something like that, and it keeps us from being present. This is like when I'm looking at the Rockies disappear behind me and I'm swerving on the road. It affects our direction, right? Or perhaps we look in the rearview mirror, we don't spend enough time doing it. We just are kind of going through life, white-knuckling our way through, and we just go and go and go. And we never really want to acknowledge what was back there that maybe has an impact, and we hit bumps, but we don't want to go back there. That's not fun. And it's almost like sometimes I'm driving home from work, and I see like blue skies out ahead of me, but then behind me, I see this black apocalyptic cloud of a storm coming in. You guys have probably experienced that before driving. And I think that's how some of us live our lives. Just we got to keep our eyes ahead and let's not acknowledge what's behind us and let's just hope that it never catches up to us. See, the danger with our rearview mirrors is that they have a tendency to get in the way of our direction in life. And the premise of this entire series, and we talked about this in part 1, is this idea from Andy Stanley. It says, direction, not intention, determines destination. We all have a desired destination as it relates to being parents, as it relates to our marriage, relationships, school, job, the dreams that we have, the communities that we live in. We all desire something, and we have great intentions. Like we have great intentions on how we can get there, but oftentimes the intentions don't get us there. It's looking honestly at the direction in life that we are actually headed, because direction, not intention, determines destination. But sometimes, I'll try to align these two things, but it just feels like it keeps going back over and over and over again, and no matter how many books I read or sermons I listen to or how hard I try, I just can't seem to stay on the direction that ultimately leads to my desired destination, and it leads to this feeling of being stuck. Like we're stuck between our direction and our intention, and we find ourselves feeling, well, I don't know how I got here. We find ourselves going, I don't know how my relationship ended up here. I don't know how my financial situation ended up here. I don't know how I ended up with this habit that I can't control. I don't know how I ended up exploding on the people I love most around me all the time, and I don't know where these emotions come from, and it's hurting them, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how I got here in my faith. Is this really all that there is? I don't know how I got here in feeling so numb and purposeless in life. Or maybe you just don't like where you are, or we say, I don't like who I am, but I don't really know how to change it. Leads to us feeling stuck, trying to align our direction and our intention, but we're not able to do so. And I don't think we often realized how significant the rear view mirrors of our life are when it comes to the direction that we are headed. I want to explain what I mean by this a little bit further. There's this resource I came across recently. It's called What Happened to You? And it's an amazing book, and I've gone back to it a bunch over and over again. And the main premise in this book is so oftentimes when we feel a gap in our life, we want to make a change, that we say, what's wrong with me? Or we say, what's wrong with you, right? We feel this gap, we want to fix it. It's like we have that Napoleon Dynamite moment, when he's like, idiot. And we say that to ourselves. Maybe your self-talk is far better than mine, it seems. But we say, what's wrong with me? And the whole premise of the book, just spoiler alert, is that there's a better, more helpful question to ask as you think about your behavior and what drives your behavior in your brain. And the better question is, what happened to you? What happened to me that leads me to behave the way that I do today? And they go on to substantiate this by looking at the brain, and they look at how our brain behaves related to our behavior. And I just want to caveat with this. I am not a neuroscientist, and I'm not going to pretend to be. And if you are, I apologize. This is going to be an oversimplification of a very complex concept. But here's what they describe, that we all have these situations in our life, like me even talking right now to you and you hearing it, and it goes through our 5 senses: sound, smell, sight, touch, and taste. It goes through these 5 senses up into our brain, through the brain stem, where there's unconscious functions are controlled, and then it goes into these lower parts of the brain right here. And these lower parts of the brain, it does this in a linear fashion. So it does this first, and it goes to where we have sleep, memory. These things are controlled in this part of the brain: appetite, bonding, movement, emotions, reward, all of these things in our brain. And then the information goes up a little further into what is called the cortex, and that controls creativity, thinking or logic, language or values, what time it is, our brain knowing what time it is, and the hope that we experience in our life. Which means, with the things that we experience every single day, as we're trying to align our direction and our intention and all this, the things that we experience every day have to travel through the lower parts of our brain first, where we have all of our experiences, our memories, our biases that have been confirmed or not confirmed over time, has to travel through all of that before it ever gets to a place where we can actually think logically about whether or not that aligns with who we are and our values. So a bigger example of this is thinking about someone who has PTSD, maybe from combat or something like that. They have PTSD, and they go to a firework display, and they describe this occurrence in the book with a real-life example. And the fireworks trigger things in their memory that feel or resemble combat. And it goes through these lower parts of the brain first, where they have memory, experiences, all of this stuff. And before their brain is able to tell their body, hey, it's just fireworks, it throws them into a full-on panic attack. Because our brain has the ability to tell our body to react before we are even aware that it is reacting. Here's why we dive this deep into kind of understanding the way our brain works is this happens all the time. It's happening right now as I say this now, this information traveling through all your past experiences, memories, biases. And as we all have great intentions in life, oftentimes what matters a little bit more is what's in the lower parts of our brain. This is neurobiologically why direction, not intention, determines destination. And so oftentimes when we experience this gap, we ask a really good question. We ask this question of, how do I change my direction? How can I change my direction? How can I get these things aligned to get where I want to go? But where we find ourselves feeling stuck, we perhaps have to take it a layer further. We have to ask another question, a far scarier question, but a far more significant question, I believe. We have to ask, why am I headed in this direction in the first place? What led me to where I am today? Why am I the way that I am today? Why am I headed in this direction in the first place? This is what we are going to explore today, but it's going to require all of us to look into the rearview mirror of our life. To explore this question, what we're going to do is look at what is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I would say, apart from the story of Jesus, that this story has influenced my life, my marriage, my trajectory, what I believe about myself, where I work, all of these things. It's influenced all of this more than anything else. And it's the story of this man named Joseph in the book of Genesis. And I want to caveat with this. Joseph's life spans about 14 chapters in the book of Genesis. And so I know Jen said we'd be here for an hour. We're going to be here for about 5 hours today, just going through this together. I'm just kidding. Some of you guys are like, is he serious? No, I'm not serious. But we're going to look at Joseph's life. And because it's so long, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at a couple of specific parts and really this statement at the end. And we're going to summarize a lot along the way. But what you have to know about Joseph is he has a very complex family. I want to show you his family tree. This is Joseph and his father Jacob. Joseph is a great-grandchild of Abraham. So if you're familiar with Abraham, he's a great-grandchild. And he's got 11 brothers. He's the 11th of 12 brothers of Jacob. But the family is a little complex. These brothers would eventually form the basis for what would become known as the nation of Israel, because Jacob became renamed as Israel. But Jacob had multiple wives along the way, so a lot of these brothers are like half-brothers. And not only this, but Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, gave him a firstborn son whose name was Joseph. So he is Jacob's favorite son. The problem with this is that Jacob creates an environment that I would not recommend, in that he makes it very plain to all of his children that Joseph is his favorite child. Again, it is not very wise because it doesn't turn out great for what happens going forward. But he gives him a special robe to signify that he's his favorite, just not super good for the family dynamic. And then finally one day, Joseph comes to his brothers and he just throws fuel on this fire of tension that has been created. And he says to his brothers, and I want to modernize this just a little bit for us, but he essentially says, hey, I just want you to know, I had a dream last night, and it was the craziest thing. I'm like Tom Brady, and you are all my water boys. And he tells him this. This is like basically what he tells him. He's looking, he's in, one day I'm going to look down upon all of you. You're going to be slaves, all this kind of stuff. He tells him his dream. And so there's a lot of tension, and then it just builds and builds and builds. And then one day, this is where we jump into Genesis. It says that Joseph was going out to meet his brothers. And it says when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. So again, lots of tension in the family. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. So much just sarcasm dripping. You can feel the bitterness from his brothers. And then Judah, one of the brothers, thinks a little bit more logically here. Look at what Judah says. What will we gain by killing our brother? Guys, this is so inconvenient. We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. Again, there's some traders coming off in the distance. After all, he is our own brother, our own flesh and blood. Come on, guys, we're not savages here. Let's just sell him into slavery, okay? This is what happens. So that's what they do. It goes on, it explains, and his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. And so at this point in Joseph's life, he's 17 years old when this happens. And he's sold into slavery, taken to Egypt. And here's where we're going to summarize a lot of what is happening. Because he's 17, he's sold into slavery, he's bought by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar is basically like captain of the guard. He's chief executioner for King Pharaoh of Egypt. And so he's a very wealthy, very powerful, and dangerous man. And Joseph is serving as a slave in his household, but he does well over time, and eventually he finds himself in charge of all of Potiphar's household. He flourishes in this house. But then something happens. He's still a slave, and something happens, and that Potiphar's wife takes a liking to Joseph. And she tries to seduce him. And multiple times he says, no, I need to honor my master. And he does this over and over again until finally she manipulates this situation. She falsely accuses him. He's mistried and he's thrown into prison. And this is significant because we don't know exactly how long Joseph was in prison, but what we can kind of pick up from the text and where it does give us his age, it was about 10 years he was in prison. So he's sold into slavery, he's put in prison, falsely accused, and I would imagine he's sitting there on day 1 or 2 or 3 just going like, is this really what has come of my life and my story? And so for 10 years he's in prison, and then one day he finds himself face to face with the king of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is asking him to interpret one of his dreams. Now again, Joseph should pause because interpreting dreams has not gone so well for him in the past. It's how he ended up being a slave. He told his brothers, right? But in this moment, well, the reason he's standing before Pharaoh is because he was in jail at one point, or prison, and these 2 guys were in there. They were some of Pharaoh's guys. They'd just gotten in trouble, and they were going to go back out eventually. But they had these dreams, and they're like, we don't know what to do with these. Joseph tells them what it means, and then it comes true, which is super unfortunate for one of the guys who gets impaled on a spike, and then another guy bodes a lot better for him. But eventually, Pharaoh has these dreams. Nobody can interpret them, and then this guy remembers Joseph. He says, hey, there's this Hebrew man in prison, and I think he can tell us what the dream means. And so one day, Joseph is standing in front of him, and he tells him, hey, here's what your dream means. It means that you're going to have 7 years of prosperity in Egypt, and then you're going to have 7 years of famine. And he kind of points to God as the reason he knows this. 7 years of prosperity, 7 years of famine. Pharaoh hears this, looks back at Joseph and says, well, I need somebody to prepare us for the famine that's going to come. And so I want to appoint you to be in charge of this. So he interprets Pharaoh's dream, and then he's put in charge of Egypt to prepare them for this famine. So then there's this 7 years of prosperity. Joseph attributes more of this to the hand of God than anything else, that he found himself in this position. But the 7 years of prosperity, it's going great. He's preparing the land, storing up grain, he's being really wise. And then when he's 37 years old, the 7-year famine begins. Egypt is ready for it because of his leadership. But the surrounding nations are not. And again, I want to pause here because it's been 20 years since he was sold into slavery. 20 years, which means over half of his life now has been spent in Egypt. Over half of his life, his family, that betrayal is just a memory in the past at this point. He's accepted that this is his life now. And so he's prepared for it. The nations around are not, but then all of a sudden, his story intersects with his family's story again. So look at what happens. It says, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt because all the surrounding nations didn't have it, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another?" Which I just love this, because I picture these like big men with beards just scrolling on TikTok on their phones as they're all like starving to death. Like this is what's happening. He's like, "Why are you standing around looking at one another?" He says, "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die." And so, 22 years later now, his brothers come to Egypt and they find themselves standing face to face with the second in command of Egypt. So Joseph is standing looking at his brothers. And you can imagine kind of the emotion, the thoughts, what he was experiencing in this moment. And here's what happens. So Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but they didn't recognize him. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" So he accuses them of being spies, and he kind of, makes this whole situation, and it makes it hard for them to get food. But I think that we would all look at Joseph standing there looking at his brothers, just wondering, what is he going to do with them? How is he going to treat them? After everything that they have done, what is going to be his response? And what is he feeling? What is he going through? And we get a little bit of an insight into what is going on inside of him, because what happens is his brothers are in front of him and they start talking amongst themselves, and they're arguing about what got them into this situation. And then one of them says, "You know what? I think what got us here is that sin that we committed where we sold our brother into slavery. God is punishing us now. That's why we are here." But they don't know that Joseph can understand them because they're talking in their original language. It says, of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter, pretending. Now he turned away from them and began to weep. And so Joseph experiences what is in his rearview mirror right before him in this moment. And it just brings up all of this stuff in him that's there. He can't help it. It's just a part of his story. It's a part of his life. And so he sends them away with food. Finally, he doesn't really do anything with it this time, but he throws on this whole charade knowing they're going to have to eventually come back. And so finally they come back looking for more food, find themselves face to face with him again. And he's at the end of himself. It says Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. And he reveals his identity to them. I want to pause here because I think many of us in here would look at this situation, this story, and go, okay, now they're going to get what they had coming. Now they're finally going to get a punishment for what they did. He's going to get revenge. He's going to get vengeance. He's finally, after everything he's been through, slavery, prison, falsely accused, being away from his family, all of it, he's finally going to give them what they deserve. And then he does the opposite. It describes him that he hugs his brothers. They're in shock. They don't even know what to think in this moment. But he hugs them. It says he weeps over them. And it describes it in such a way like he tries to make small talk with them. And then all of a sudden he tells them, "Hey, I want you to bring your families into Egypt. I want you to bring our father into Egypt. I'm going to give you land, and I'm going to take care of you." And he does the unthinkable. He gives them grace in this moment. And so they come into Egypt for 15 years. The family is good. They're back together. And then when Joseph is 56 years old, almost 40 years since he was sold into slavery by his brothers, when he's 56 years old, his father dies. His father dies. And at this point, I think that his brothers are thinking a lot of what we think as well, and that they're asking the question of, through everything that he's been through, what allowed him to have that kind of response and reaction to his brothers? What allowed him to have that kind of grace for his brothers? And they're thinking this, and we see this in Genesis because it describes it. It says, after burying Jacob, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's burial. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him. We're finally going to get what we deserve. And so what they do is they send a message to Joseph. It says they sent a message to him. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you. Which I just want to pause. It's so interesting because it's like these full-grown men being, hey, Dad said to tell you to forgive us, okay? Dad said, it's just Dad, it's not us. And then they have a much more genuine response. They say, so we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. And then look at this. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Almost 40 years later, his family is still torn apart because of what happened. And his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Look, we are your slaves. And here I bet Joseph is remembering that dream that he told them all those years ago as a teenager, where they were going to bow down before him. And there's so many different things Joseph could do here. So many different paths he could take. His dad is gone, so he doesn't really have to be accountable for that. He can just do whatever he wants with his brothers. He can have them sent in prison, executed, sent away, whatever he wants. Look at how he responds to them bowing down before him. Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? Am I God that I can punish you? Joseph knows both who he is and who he is not in this moment. And he recognizes this is an incredibly humble response. It takes a lot of character to have a response like this, but he recognizes that his 11 brothers bowing down before him, that they breathe the same oxygen as him. They bleed the same blood as him. And he says, you know what? I'm not God. I'm not the one who has to deal with justice and all that. So am I God that you should fear me? And then he says this incredible statement, spoken 3,500 years ago. It's recorded so we can learn from it today. It's a statement that has changed the trajectory of my life very genuinely, just the many times that I've wrestled with it and read it. It's a statement that really serves as a precursor to the story of Jesus. And I believe it's a statement that serves as a way forward to help you get unstuck in whatever direction of life you might be on. Look at what Joseph says to his 11 brothers bowing down before him. He says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. You intended to harm me. Here is what you did to me, and I will never get that back. But I can look at it and I can say, you know what? Here's what I learned. Here's what God taught me in this. Here's how it shaped me into the man that I am today. Here's how it grew me to the point of having power and authority where I could make sure I could take care of the people of Egypt and the surrounding nations. I could take care of you. And so you know what? I would look back on it and I would say, God intended it all for good. I think we hear that kind of perspective, that response, and we just ask the question, how in the world can he have that kind of perspective? How can he stand in front of his brothers who had ruined his life and say that before them? To kind of wrap up our time here in the next few minutes, what I want to do is I want to look at 3 very specific things that we see in Joseph's life and story in this statement that kind of enables us to be able to reframe the stories of our life and to be able to look in the rearview mirror and get unstuck with whatever it might be. First, we see from Joseph that very simply, getting unstuck starts by just acknowledging what is there. I think many of us look in our rearview mirror and we don't want to acknowledge what is in it. We don't want to be honest about it. This is difficult. This is painful sometimes to look in our rearview mirror and talk about what's happening. I think if I'm fine is a regular part of your vocabulary, and perhaps the people around you would say you're not fine, then maybe there's something that needs to be acknowledged in your rearview mirror. It is painful. It is hard. I think we don't do it because we don't want to hurt others. We don't want to dishonor someone's memory. But there's a cost associated to it if we're not willing to acknowledge. Amanda Palmer says this in the Tim Ferriss podcast. She says, if you don't deal with your demons, they go into the cellar of your soul and lift weights. If you don't deal with your demons, they go into the cellar of your soul. These things don't go away. I've always heard Buck say, what's in you comes out of you on those around you. These things don't go away. They will come out of you eventually, and the collateral damage is not just your life, but it's the lives of the people closest to you, the people that you love the most. that it'll affect them. And so we have to acknowledge it. Be honest about it. This is making it tangible, quite literally, writing down what is in your rearview mirror, acknowledging what has perhaps led you to where you are today. It's talking to someone about it, or talking with a trusted friend or a counselor about these things. Acknowledging it is far easier said than done, but it's the first way to begin getting unstuck and help you change your direction. The next thing we have to do is we have to process what it is. We have to acknowledge it first, and then we have to process. I think Joseph did this so clearly. He acknowledged it to his brothers. He said, hey, you intended to harm me, but when we look at these years of prison and slavery, we see that he had these years where I would imagine he had to do some deep, dark, kind of soul searching inside of him to get him to the point that he could say this in front of his brothers. One of my favorite proverbs says that a man's heart are like deep waters, but one with insight draws them out. That the deeper parts of us that drive who we are, all those things in our brain, they're like deep waters. They're hard to understand, but one with insight and wisdom pulls them out and begins to understand them. Because processing is asking this question: what happened in me as a result of what happened to me? What happened in me as a result of happened to me? What are the implications in my life? How I view the world, how I view myself, how I view the people around me, how I view God, how I view the church? What have been the implications in my life because of that experience? It's connecting these dots. It's being able to look and say, you know what? I've always said I'm not a relational person, but perhaps the reason I'm lonely today is because I've been telling myself that my whole life, because at one point I tried to trust someone and I learned it's not okay to trust other people. Connecting the dots is looking at what drives you to succeed and drives you to build wealth at all costs to those around you and your own personal health, and going, you know what? Maybe it's because what that person said or did in me all those years ago, and it just lit a fire underneath me where I wanted to prove them right or prove them wrong. Processing is looking at our discontentment that we feel. The good life is always on the other side. The grass is always greener, and going, you know what? Maybe it's because it was never modeled for me what it means just to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. What it means to see beauty in the mundane and just be grateful and happy right where I am. That's processing it. It's looking at that habit that we have and finding the hole that habit's been trying to fill. It's looking at our propensity to go into toxic relationships, yearning for connection because we never got it. We never felt valued, and so we don't think of ourselves as valuable, so we keep finding ourselves going back over and over and over again. Processing is very broadly just discovering the lies we've been telling ourselves our entire journey because of something that is in our rearview mirror. You have to make it tangible. You have to write it down. Unfortunately, in our culture today, where loneliness is coined an epidemic, sometimes you have to pay somebody to help you process these things because we just don't have these kind of relationships built into our culture naturally. Sometimes you have to do that. For me personally, there was a season of my life where I had gone through something, and then what I experienced is there was something in me coming out of me on all the things I cared about most. And I had a couple options. I could either figure it out, I could run, or I was just going to break eventually. And so through some men in my life who told me some advice and helped me figure out what to do, I grabbed a journal and a pen for the first time in my life, and I just began to write down everything I was going through. I just wrote down what had happened. I wrote down what I was going through, what I was thinking and what I was wrestling with. For the first time, I had to answer this question, what are you feeling? Which I was like, what? I'm fine. What am I feeling? I'm good. Like, it's okay. And I didn't know how to answer that question. I literally, like a child, I had to take out my phone and look at the emojis on my phone to try to figure out what I was feeling. Like, which one did I resonate with the most? And I would write it down. I did this day after day after day. It was incredibly difficult, but it led me to a point where I could process what was going on. And it led me to a point where I could eventually move on to this next phase of what we see in Joseph, and ultimately this statement he makes. When he acknowledges, he processes, and then he's able to reframe what is going on. I don't ever want to minimize or simplify what anybody in here has gone through or has experienced. Those things are real, They're not fair. They're not justified. It's not emotionally satisfying. I don't think it was emotionally satisfying for Joseph in this moment when he looked at his brothers and he said that. But they're a part of our stories, and they have a tendency to keep us stuck or to come out on those around us if we're not careful. So retelling the story it's just recognizing that if we tell the same story, if you keep telling yourself the same story, you're going to keep experiencing the same outcome. It is choosing to see it differently, not letting them off the hook, not putting your head in the sand, but intentionally choosing to reframe your story, to rewrite the story of your life. It's exactly what Joseph did in this moment when he looked at his brothers and he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good." He could have said, "You intended to harm me, and here's what happened, and here's the damage, and all of this stuff." But he said, "Nope, I'll never get that back. That's true, but God intended it all for good." And he rewrote his story in that moment. I think Joseph and even the writers of the New Testament, when they say things like, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind," they are so ahead of their time, like thousands of years ahead of their time, and what they are saying in these moments. Because as of 25 years ago, what we now know about our brains is this thing called neuroplasticity, where those neural pathways and things that have been written over time that have led us on the direction we are today, these things can be rewritten. If we choose to reframe over and over again, we can write new neural pathways in our brain that can free us to experience something better. And really, I believe, free us to experience what I think God has for all of us in our journeys of trying to reach the desired destination, whatever that might be. But I think the two most powerful words in this statement are these two words right here. But God. But God. In fact, I would say, and this is just my personal opinion, so this isn't in the Bible or anything like that, but I would say that for me, I think this whole thing is a house of cards without those two words. Because I don't know where, for me in my story personally, where to substantiate the peace and the love and the goodness without those two words right there. Because those two words insert the story of Jesus into this entire picture. Again, they are a precursor to the story of Jesus, that we were separate from God in our sin, but God made a way for us to be right with him and have a relationship with him through the person of Christ. That means those two words mean that because of Christ, what that person said or did that ascribed value to you, and whatever lie you've been telling yourself, can be replaced with the truth of what your heavenly Father says about you, that you are a son, you are a daughter of him. Those two words mean that because of Christ, we can know that yes, we messed up, we did these things, but through Jesus, tomorrow is a new day over and over and over again. Because of Christ, we know that yes, life is hard, but God can turn the most hurtful things into something good, even when we don't feel it, even when we can't see it. It's two powerful words that substantiate this entire idea. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. You see, reframing doesn't just happen once. It's not something you just do one time and you're like, "Man, it's the craziest thing. I feel great now," right? You have to do it over and over and over again. I would expect that Joseph did this in his mind over and over and over again before that moment when he's standing before his brothers and he said these words. We have to do the same thing. We have to write it down, speak it over ourselves over and over again as it makes its way down from our head to our heart. And it's something we experience and truly frees us and gets us unstuck. We've been talking about these different principles on the rules for the road. And I just want to share and wrap up what is tip number 4 for this series. It's this: reframe what's in your rearview mirror. Far easier said than done. We have to reframe what is in our rearview mirror. I just want to acknowledge that we're all at different places with this. And we're going to wrap up here in just a moment. We're going to try to create an opportunity for all of us just to invite God into whatever we see in our rearview mirror, whatever we're experiencing as we think about this. And our band's going to come out, they're going to get set, and they're going to sing a song in a second. But I just want you guys to lean in for a moment. I would just ask you to lean in because I recognize for some of us in here, the idea of acknowledging it, you're like, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to go back there. But perhaps it's an opportunity to invite God into that. If that's your pushback and you would say, I'm not doing that, perhaps this is just an opportunity for you to invite God in to whatever is in your rearview mirror of your life. For us men in here, I would say this is the hardest, because being honest about what's in our rearview mirror, it means that we don't have it all together. It means that we're broken. It means that we can't fix it on our own. And I would just say in my own experience with the greatest men that I know, it takes far more courage to acknowledge it than it does to ignore it. And your loved ones in your life that you love and you serve and you provide for every single day, it's the greatest gift you can give them. It's the best version of you, a version that has acknowledged what is in your rearview mirror. So for some of us, that's where we are. Maybe you're in here and you need to process. Perhaps you've never kind of connected the dots between what happened and the implications about what's driven you and the lies that you've experienced in your life. Perhaps you need to process it. Or maybe you're in here and you need to reframe it. Maybe you've been telling the same story for years. Year after year after year. It's here's what happened and it ruined my life. Here's what happened and it ruined my life. And perhaps for you, the way forward is to begin to tell a different story. Yes, that happened and you can never get that back. But perhaps there's something good that God can do with it. So we're going to sing a song as an opportunity for all of us to invite God in to our own lives, our own stories. The song is called Evidence, and it says these words, God, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life. I know that for some of us in here, singing those words right now with whatever you're going through or experiencing maybe sounds ridiculous. You would go, how can I ever sing that I see the evidence of God's goodness in my life based on what I have seen and what I've gone through? And if that's where you are, I just want to say that's fair. I'm not going to push on that, or it's okay to be there. And I just want you to know that I believe that God sees you in that he loves you right where you are, that he cares for you in that. He demonstrated that through the person of Jesus. And not only that, but he opens up an opportunity for you to bring the rawest version of yourself, the most imperfect version of you, and go, God, I don't think that's true. I don't feel that. I don't believe that. And you can bring that to God, and he can meet you in that. For some of us, this opportunity to reframe in just a second is for you to finally declare over your life that perhaps there's been something good that God has done with the journey that you have been on. And I want to provide that space. And so you don't have to sing if you don't want to. For some of you, I'd invite you to sing. But would you stand with us, and the band's going to lead us.
You are my strength and always will be. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. Oh, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Why should I fear the evidence is here? Why should I fear the evidence is here? Why should I fear the evidence is here? Why should I fear the evidence is here?
Would y'all pray with me? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, you see where we all are. And I just recognize that some of us are in a place where we need to acknowledge, maybe we need to process, we need to reframe, and wherever we are, whatever we're walking out with, let this not just be something that we hear, but something that we do something with what we hear. And would you meet us in that process? God, we trust you in that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for being here. We'll see you next week.